This is Damian Macy, representing the Friends of the Marshall Public Library, and today I'm at the library with Patty Mars. She's a longtime resident, although she grew up someplace else. She's going to tell us about her story, and they were involved in business here, which I think probably has some interesting background too. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patty. Today is June the 28th, 2017, and here is Patty.
Thank you, Damien. Well, I was born way back in February the 5th, 1930. And how I become to be born in Hammond, Indiana, is I will tell a little story on that. This seed, 1930, was pretty close in the Depression years. Well, my mother and dad and all their families had grown up in a farm area around Edgar County, Paris, Illinois. But it was getting pretty difficult. My dad had 5 brothers. I mean, he was one of 5. My mother was from a family of 5. So they decided, since my dad had a sister living up in Calumet City, that's up south of Chicago, that there would be work up there. So they went up there, mother and dad. No children at that time. And Dad worked in the steel mills. And so we lived in Calumet City. And I didn't. They lived in Calumet City, and my sister was born there. She's about a year and a half older than me. And then Dad went to work also for Henry Ford Motor Company.
I've heard of them.
Yes. And we moved over to Hammond, Indiana, into a different state, just across the line, actually, from Calumet City. And I was born there then, in February of 1930. And Dad continued to work up there. However, he was still wanted to farm. So when I was about, I suppose, 3, he moved Mother and we 2 girls back down to Paris, south of Paris. He would go up and work through the week and then drive home a lot of times on weekends. Well, we lived along Route 1 south of Paris. And there was an old fella that lived in with us, Benny Castile, which is that name is kind of known around Marshall, Castiles. But anyway, he was an old fella, and we girls just thought he was the greatest, you know. He was like a grandpa to us. But anyway, he was there, and Dad felt safer with somebody else in the house. Sure. And he would come home on weekends, and so after, I think I was about 4, maybe 5. Anyway, my sister was ready to start first grade. Mother didn't want her to walk by herself because we'd have to walk about 2 miles, starting out along Route 1. So she decided, since I was 5, I could go too. So I started school when I was 5 years old.
Wow.
Walked across a couple of country roads to a 1-room schoolhouse. And that was my first grade. And so then Dad decided he would be able to come back home and farm as he wanted to. So anyway, my sister, of course, being a little older than me, we were both glad for Dad to come home. Yeah. And he took on more farm ground. My sister's name was Beverly Jean. And so anyway, she and I were so glad because Dad was coming home. Well, we needed more farm ground, so he moved actually over on the Preston Road, which is just about a block over from Route 1, kind of south of Paris. And a larger farm, farming with horses, no tractors at that time. And of course, no electricity, no running water. And so my sister and I were brought up that way in the Depression years, and I often say I never got over them because, you kind of learn what's important.
What was your maiden name, your last name?
Oh, yes. I forgot my parents' names either. Stickler was my maiden name. My dad was Ted. Some people, it was James Theodore, but everybody called him Ted. My mother was Mary Elizabeth. Her maiden name Thiel, Thiel. And they all lived in this same area, south of Paris. And so anyway, Mother and Dad and we two girls moved to this larger farm, farming with horses, still going to a one-room school, Fort Sumter School, south of Paris. One-room school. I spent all 8 years there. Well, 7.5, yeah. The other half I'd spent at Turner School. But I spent my grade school years there, walking around 2 miles all the time. And but we had, along the road were other kids walking too. We just had a great time because you become friends with all of these neighbors,
The crowd just became a little larger as you got closer to school, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And we enjoyed that really. I mean, when you think back on it. And if it was a terribly rainy or something, Dad would break loose and drive us there. But usually he was too busy because the farming, and they had a dairy and a livestock of all kinds. So there was never a dull moment as far as something to do. There was always something to do. And so anyway, as we were going to school and picking up other kids all along, I think the one-room schoolhouse is something that a lot of people don't realize how great it was because it was a community center. Mm-hmm. Because we'd have monthly community meetings, they called it. And one family in the community would be responsible for planning the refreshments and maybe the program. And we had one lady that was wonderful with plays. And she would rehearse plays with people, and then they'd put on plays. And so we got educated in that type of thing also.
Did you ever have any pie suppers at that?
We'd have pie suppers. We did. We had wiener roasts, depending on what time of year it was. But it was a community center. It wasn't just for the kids to go to school. It was the center, that everybody took part in.
Do you feel in that one-room school that when you were in maybe a lower grade, you learned a lot because you could hear what was going on in the front of the room with an older class?
Definitely. I said there were a lot of times I didn't even crack a book because I had listened to it before and I already knew it.
Good, that's what I thought.
And we had, of course, our folding seats, but up across the front was this big, long, they called it recitation bench that folded down. And whatever class was doing their reciting would come and sit on that. But it was awful hard to be studying and not listening to what they were saying. So I did learn a lot that way.
Did you have rather small numbers in each class?
Yes. I expect probably in my class there were maybe 4, maybe 5. They moved out and in. A lot of times they would be farm hands, that would move in to work for some family, and maybe they wouldn't stay very long. So it kind of changed a lot, but I would say 4 or 5 probably in my class.
Now, I know at that time you did not have a cafeteria at school.
No.
You didn't have drinking fountains and all of that, but what did you take to school for lunch?
Well, we
I bet
carried
Mother fixed you up something.
yes, we carried our dinner buckets, and at the back of the school there was a cloak room, and you put your cloak there and your dinner bucket when you first came in. The girls on one side and the boys on the other. And so when it come lunchtime, we always had some kind of a sandwich, and it varied from maybe they'd had sausage for breakfast, maybe it was a sausage sandwich, maybe it was a bacon sandwich. Could have been a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But we always had that, and we always had some kind of fruit. And we always had some kind of dessert, of course.
I like a good healthy meal.
Oh, we always did. Always had a healthy meal. Mother was raised on the farm. She was raised in gardening, and that's what our food was. Whatever we raised, whatever was available. Of course, we didn't have electricity, so we didn't have refrigerators and freezers and all that. So it was what she had preserved a lot of times, like our jellies and jams.
Did you help gardening and all?
I did. I helped with the gardening, especially picking green beans. But I loved them. And she always canned whatever, was available. And those days when you had to break all those beans that we were canning, and hull the peas, that was harder. Yeah. But we always had I would say balanced meals, because we, having a dairy, we had all the milk. She made our own cottage cheese,
Okay.
and that was great. And she always churned our own butter. And we had chickens, so we had our eggs. We had a balanced meal, even though we were self-sufficient, I would say.
Did Mom and Dad have certain chores for you and your siblings to participate in?
Definitely. My sister was more, I would say, of the tomboy type. And she would help a lot with feeding the livestock, of an evening. Dad had the cows, and Mother helped him milk by hand. I never did really milk, but while they were doing that, a lot of times Mother would say, what we're going to have for supper. That's what we called our evening meal, was supper. And she would say, tell me how to fix it, and kind of show me different things. And she would go off to the barn to help Dad milk. My sister was doing feeding. She was feeding pigs or horses or whatever there was to feed, so she was busy with that. It was always my job, before I started the supper, to bring in the fuel. We had our wood pile, which we had sawed the wood, Dad had sawed wood. We had a big wood pile. I'd bring in the wood onto the back porch for the last through the night and the next day. I'd go to the barn and pick up the cobs out of the horse mangers where they had eaten the corn off the cobs. That was what Dad used to start the fire with. So I had to have that. We didn't have coal at that time. I mean, we didn't buy it. We could have. We lived along a railroad track, and occasionally we picked up coal that had fallen off of the train as it went
Did
through.
you soak those cobs in any kerosene to help get them started?
Dad did the fire starting, but I presume he probably did.
Okay.
But I was to have them in, and if I would forget or something, the next morning, because that was the coal or the wood range was what we cooked on, plus it was the heat if it was cool. And if I had forgotten something, I got an early call to get up and go get it. Because Dad did that before he went out to the dairy and all of that. And Mother would get up, and the fire would be hot by then, and she would cook breakfast. So that was one of my chores. And then, like when Mother was going to help Dad milk in the evening and telling me about supper, I would go ahead and fix the supper. And she would just brag about it when she come in, so that really fired me up,
Sure.
That was my first cooking, yeah. And then, of course, we always helped with the dishes. My sister and I usually washed the dishes and she dried them. I don't know why it was that way, but
You didn't
Yes,
have
we
a
did.
GE to push the button to do the
No,
water
we didn't
dishes
have.
then.
We didn't have the electricity either. We didn't have the water either. We had to heat the water. Had to heat the water for everything. And but we weren't used to it any other way. So, we didn't feel deprived at all. We had a good time.
Do you have a lot of recipes that maybe your mother used to cook meals with, or not?
I'm sure I do, to know them right offhand. But, there's a lot of things that I eat nowadays that don't taste like Mother's exactly.
Never
Her
do.
green beans were always good. They were always seasoned with either bacon fryings or occasionally some ham, but mostly bacon fryings. And they were cooked just right. And the mashed potatoes, they were wonderful because we had our own cream and our own butter to.
And those potatoes came out of your own garden, too.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Yes. And I used to tell my grandma when she planted garden, I say, plant mashed potatoes and plant onions. I loved onions, and I called them onions. And those were the foods we had, and we liked them. We didn't feel deprived.
You still like those today, too?
I still do. Onions I can hardly live without. I love them. But anyway, and I'm still have some gardening at home.
Okay.
Can't hardly get away from it.
Did you have a hobby or something back then that maybe you've carried on to today?
A hobby? Well, I don't know whether you call it a hobby, but my sister and I did a lot of horseback riding, and we loved the horses. And when we were small, a fellow that raised ponies in the area would loan them out to you for taking care of them through the summer,
Okay.
And so we would go and get the ponies. And my sister and I we would get those ponies up and put their bridles on. We always rode bareback. We'd put those ponies with their bridles on and their reins on the ground, and they would eat in the front yard. When we got ready to get on them, we'd lead them back to the gate, climb up on the gate and jump on the horse. But that was about as close to hobby. I did like to sew, and I had an aunt that taught me crochet and that kind of thing when I was pretty young, but I've always liked to.
Now, you talked about getting on that horse. Did they ever have different ideas if they didn't want you back there?
Well, the worst one was one we called Nancy, and she was stubborn. I couldn't make her go, but my sister could for some reason. I guess she would dig her heels in more or something. She could make her go. So I had a little dark-colored pony that I don't guess we didn't rent them from this fella because we just kept them. And then at the time when they would have their colts, we'd have to take them back to him, see. But we usually had at least a couple ponies there. But
Now, you referred to renting or having them during the summer. I guess you were kind of a foster parent for them.
yeah.
Was it ever hard to give those back or to send them back?
Oh, yes.
I think so.
Yes. And so Dad he would buy one once in a while that we could keep all the time. And one of the worst days, I remember the little black pony that I rode. Dad was needing a pickup truck. And I come home from school one day, and Dad had traded Prince, that was my pony's name, for this on this truck. Oh boy, that wasn't too happy a day. So we had a saddle horse then, they called Babe, and she was very tame. And she was a racker, so she rode real easy. So I inherited her kind of then. We never give up our horses completely, but sometimes we had to switch to another one. But I don't know. Growing up on the farm was a lot of work, but our friends and everybody were kind of in the same boat, and we never felt deprived at all. And though Dad was strict on, seemed like the farming all come first, he never forgot that we always went to Sunday school. And if the neighbor wasn't coming by to pick us up, he would find time to get us into First Christian Church at Paris. That's where we always went. He always saw that we got that done. And I think that is a great thing, because I think, like the verse says, if you teach them and then bring them up in this, then they don't forget it in years to come. Things will come back to them, even if they do stray some.
In those early years of walking to school and in the one-room school, do you remember your teachers?
Yes. I had, one I had was Mr. Dively, a man teacher. And I, at first, was a little bit afraid of him, but his wife had died and he had about 3 or 4 children he brought along with him when he taught, Jim Dively. And we got along just fine. And I guess I learned under him because I did okay. And then after him, we had the one that was there most of my years, Violet Long, L-O-N-G. She lived out around Grandview, and she brought her son with her. I guess that was maybe the way the teachers would bring their own children with them. So anyway, Violet Long, and she was a wonderful teacher. She taught us so much besides just school, like, I'm jumping ahead here maybe, but during World War II, she had taken on a project of knitting gloves and scarves for servicemen with the Red Cross, I think it was. So anyway, she taught all we 7th and 8th graders to knit. And we knit scarves, and we knit gloves, and we knit mittens. And as years went by, I still did some knitting. But that's where I learned to knit.
This would be good and warm, too.
Yes, yes.
Did she provide the yarn?
Yes, yes, she provided that. Now, I don't know whether that came like from the Red Cross, whether she was supplied that, but she had so many pieces that she would, need to turn in. And we girls all learned to knit, and I remember the gloves and I remember the scarves. Of course, that was easy, no shaping or anything, So she taught us that. And we'd take that home and work on it, and then we'd bring it back the next day, and it was just great to learn those things.
You mentioned having a recitation bench in front. Could you kind of describe the one-room schoolhouse and what it was like inside?
Of course, we didn't have modern heat, and we had a furnace. It wasn't just a little stove. It was a big, round furnace. And it was her responsibility, the teacher's responsibility, to get there early enough to build up a fire in that big old... And it set up in this corner. The teacher's desk was in this corner. And then there were 2 recitation benches across the front. Yeah. In some of the classes, there were more students than others, but I expect at least 4 people could sit on a bench. And then we had the 1-seat folding seat desk, the desk with the that were lined up behind that. I think there were about 4 rows. And then at the back, there was a partial wall, and then, like I said, there was the cloakrooms, and then the outside doors. And of course, she'd ring the bell when it was time, And then when we'd go out for recess and time to come in, she'd ring the bell. Always we went by that bell. And time for school to start, ring that bell. And it was out there by the cloakroom, and she'd just reach up and pull it. It was a bell.
Did you have some kerosene lights so that if there was a stormy or a dismal day, you had a little bit of light?
Well, I can't remember the lights too much. Of course, there wasn't any electricity. We had 6 windows. There were at least 6, I think, on each side. Yeah, 3 or 4 on each side of the. I don't remember any, but there could have been. I suppose there would have had to been something because we had, like, our community meetings would be at night.
Right.
Now there was such a thing as the. What did they call those? Lamps that hung down and they made such a hissing sound.
Aladdin?
Aladdin lamps. We had Aladdin lamps, yeah. I do remember that. But they were noisy. But that was about the extent of
when you had a recess, what did you do out there?
Okay.
There wasn't a lot of yard equipment or lawn playground equipment, I know.
No. In my later years, there was those swings and slide set. But we played ball. We played handy over, we called it, where half of you would be on one side of the schoolhouse and half on the other, and you'd throw the ball over. And then if you caught it, you could run around to the other side and try to tag some. Then they'd have to come and be on your side until you'd soon have one big side and one not too many. But anyway, and then we played one called Dare Base, and we had fence on each side of the schoolhouse, and there'd be one from one side come up so far and dare you. Then you could run off, and if you tagged him, he had to come over to your side. But if he didn't, I don't know, I guess, anyway, they dared us to catch him. Sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. So I think theirs would come, when we started chasing him, then they'd have some others that would come chase us. So.
Now, I know there were not school buses, and you mentioned walking to school. Mm-hmm. Did any of the students, ride a horse or bicycles to school?
Yes. We had... that was before I went there, but my mother's sister, this was the same schoolhouse my mother and her family had gone to. And she drove a one pony cart, with shafts, and the one pony cart, and she would drive that. And I suppose it would have been the garage, would have been the only thing that would have been to put that pony in during the day. But, yeah, and then there were a few of them that rode ponies. We didn't have bicycles. Okay. But, and it was always fun when somebody said, I'm going to be going up the road, you want to ride? Yeah, yeah.
Especially since you liked horses.
Yeah.
Well, those poor ponies during the day then.
They'd have to bring feed for them.
I was going to say, did they just simply wander around? And
no, I think they had tied them in the barn. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And they would bring something for them to eat, of course. But I remember my aunt, my mother's sister, saying she and another one of the sisters was riding this in the cart, and she started the pony off real fast and threw my other one off over the back of the cart. That wasn't very funny. But anyway, we had a lot of fun with that.
I know those classroom recesses were fun to get out, but I'm sure there were probably a lot of skinned knees and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And you didn't have a school nurse?
No, it was just what I'm sure
wash it off and go on.
Yeah, and the teacher would always have some kind of Mercure comb or something to put on it that burnt,
Uh-huh.
And she would doctor us up if we were in too bad a shape. But anyway, it was a different kind of life, but I think it was a wonderful life.
My mother taught for 35 years, and most of them were in the one-room school. Mm-hmm. And I know she loved it.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
she was the nurse, the janitor, and the whole ball of wax.
We had one family, the Doak family, that lived across the field, quite a ways from us actually. And my sister and I would ride our ponies or horses over, and our properties had a corner post. And we'd leave a note there, and then they'd ride down and they'd pick up our note. That was our telephone messages. So we
Worked just as well as a cell phone, didn't it?
yeah, not quite as fast, but it did. But we had several others in the area that did ride ponies, and we had fun. But
Did you finally arrive with electricity when you were there,
okay, yes,
living in the country?
but not until 1943. That was the first electricity we had, and that came through the Rural Electrification Service, and it was in 1943. And in fact, I had started to high school in 43. And that's when our electricity came through. And we lived actually at the end of the line. They had certain lines, they would just go so far
Right.
where they could take, the electricity. Maybe the rest of the roadsides had not been cleared enough to put up line. And we were at the end of the line. And this was in 1943. Oh, we bought a Montgomery Ward refrigerator. Oh, that was so nice. Yeah. And this is, as Gene said, the biggest difference that he noticed was the fact that that lamp that hissed so, that Aladdin lamp, it made it so quiet in the room because they turned on the electricity and none of that hissing sound. So that was a difference. But electricity, that was the biggest thing. That was the biggest thing. And we had the barn wired too, so you had electricity. You didn't have to carry the lantern with you all the time. And I think that was the biggest thing.
You mentioned the refrigerator. How about things like stove and radio and those other things? Did those come along later?
We had a radio before, I think, with a battery on it. Yeah, but yes, we had that. We had a stove. I don't know. We'd always had a little round heating stove in the living room. I can't remember whether we had anything changed with the heating. We still didn't have running water.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Yeah. Did that electricity then make available running water or the pump in the well?
Eventually. But in the 1943, and I said we were the end of the line, that very next year, Dad bought a place south of that, and we had to move away from electricity again. And we loaned this refrigerator to a neighbor that had never bought him a refrigerator. So when we had to move back to the house with no electricity again, we had and I was a freshman in high school. Well, Dad worked hard, and he cleared the right-of-way in from the south to this house. And we eventually got electricity
Excuse me.
back in this house too.
But that was like taking a step back then, wasn't it? Before
but we had such a good taste of it. It wasn't long until he went to the line that came in closest south of us. He cleared the right-of-way for him, and they brought it in. Well, we lived there, I think, 2 years. And he bought a place closer to Paris, but again with no electricity. So this time we moved back, and he went in to talk to him at the REA, the electric company. And they said, Ted, we can't carry this around in the bucket. You're going to have to quit moving. So Dad did clear the roadway, and we got electricity the third time. This time we stayed put. And that's where actually is still in my family, that farm.
But that would be quite an adjustment to have the electricity,
Yes.
get used to it, and then
Yes.
go back to not having it.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And all of this time we never had a bathroom. We had outdoor
Outdoor
facilities.
plumbing, huh?
Outdoor plumbing. But that's what we were used to, so it wasn't,
That's what you had at school, too.
Yeah, right, yes. So anyway, you think back on those and they sound like terribly hard times, but they weren't, because about everybody we associated with was in the same situation.
So you graduated then from the Fort Sumner
Fort
School,
Sumner School.
in Fort May in 43.
I started to high school, Paris High School, in 1943.
Now, how did you get there?
Well, we had a car,
Oh, okay.
and we had a truck, pickup truck. But the neighbor that lived south of us at that time, she was a year older, and she came up the road and picked me up and my sister, and we went on into Paris. She drove. And I don't remember us ever paying anybody or anything, but she picked us up. And that was the way we got to school and back. That was, then when we moved on 2 years later, I said up to this last place. There we were again. And we're still, without running water. But we survived, and of course I wasn't aged to be driving, but I could drive because I had driven the tractors and all this kind of stuff. I want to tell about our outdoor chores too, like that. But anyway, I drove, and I would drive out to the end of our road, and then a cousin that was older would drive our car on in. The reason we drove, in the trunk of our car were 2 10-gallon milk cans standing up that we would take into the equity company in Paris and pick up the empty cans, put them back in the trunk, and then go to high school. And so that was the way that I got by without driving without a license at that time.
Did you ever forget that can of milk and leave it in the bag?
Oh, no, we never did, but I can imagine. That
could be rather disastrous.
Yeah, right. But when we were earlier days, we still cooled out that milk. And the way we did that, we pumped a small horse tank with water from a pump. And they put it in the can and put it in this water, and we had a milk stirrer, a little round disc with a handle on it that you would stir that milk until it was a certain temperature, and that way it kept it from spoiling the night before's milk. So that's the way we cooled our milk. And you think, well, that sounds like not much recreation, but we had a lot of recreation. Because Dad was a kid at heart, and he taught us, I think everybody in the neighborhood, of a night after the milk was cooled out, he would take the pickup truck, pick up all the neighbor kids up along the road, and we'd go several miles over to us riding in the back to a swimming pool, an old gravel pit. And he taught all of us how to swim.
Wow.
He loved it, and we did too. We sang songs all the way over in the back of the truck, and we sang coming back home. But of course, no lifeguards or anything like that. But I can remember.
You didn't need a radio in the truck either to do that.
I don't remember that.
You could sing without?
Yeah, we just sang. I see the moon, and the moon sees me. The moon sees somebody I'd like to see. Those kind of songs. But anyway, that was recreation. And in the wintertime, he'd take us to the creek ice skating. Taught us how to ice skate. And he was a kid along with us. He expected us to work, but he liked for us to have a good time too, with the ponies and all that. So I think I had a great childhood. All of these times on the farms, my sister and I did a lot of outside work. Dad had a stationary hay baler. And along about this time too, when I was 11, my mother we had a brother born, Ronald Stickler. Ronald Stickler is his name. And of course, he's quite a bit younger than we are. But anyway, Mother was busy with him in the garden. She couldn't go to the fields because she was busy cooking for everybody, plus a baby. And so my sister and I would go to the hayfield, and I drove an old Minneapolis Moline tractor with steel wheels clogs with a sweep brake on the front. Now the hay or the straw had been windrowed, but I would drive up this windrow collecting the wheat or the straw or the hay and push it into this stationary baler. A couple of neighbor guys that were helping would pitch it up onto a platform, and my dad would feed it into the baler. Had this thing that came up and down. He would feed it into that. My sister sat back here and she poked wires. Ever so often, he'd say, block it, and he'd drop a block in there, and my sister would push those wires through, and there was somebody sitting on the other side that would tie them. That's the way you divided your bales into bales. So anyway, we always went to the hayfield, and like kids, we were always tickled to death when it rained. Dad wasn't very happy, but we were tickled.
Did he do baling for other people on a custom basis, or just for himself?
No, he did a few others too, but not a whole lot. But we had neighbors that would come, like I said, pitching the hay up onto the platform, and they kind of worked together that way. So, yeah. But we didn't mind the tractor work, and it was a lot faster than that horse work, I tell you.
Yeah.
I can remember I think the first nickel I ever got, Dad was cultivating corn with the horses and the cultivator, and sometimes it would throw the dirt over onto the corn. Mm-hmm. It was my job to walk along behind and kick the dirt off of the corn. I said I got my first nickel, and boy, I was tickled to death. Saturday night, I could buy my own ice cream cone.
It wasn't that good.
Yeah. So, anyway, life was hard, but it was...
You mentioned going from the one-room school, going into the Paris High School. Was that a big adjustment, going from the one-room school into City High School, downtown high school?
It didn't seem to me like it was. Of course, a lot of the girls that I've been in grade school with were there too, and the ones even a little older than me that were there. It was in a way, because it seems like for a while we carried our own lunch buckets, but then they got the lunch service while I was in there, and we ate there at the cafeteria a lot. But I don't know, a lot of times friends that I made there would just be tickled to death if they could go home and stay all night with me in the country, And so anyway, I was in high school there for 4 years. And if you think back on the years, 1943 through 1947, Paris was the basketball town. We won the state tournament in 43, and we won it in 47 when I was a senior. Evelyn was the coach, and they built the new gym, for Ernie Evelyn. And, of course, we girls, everybody used the girls' gym until they built that new. And 1947, I believe, was the year. Well, anyway, I got to go into the new gym. I can't remember whether that was 1947. Anyway, we got to use that new gym. Of course, that was called the boys' gym, and the girls still had the old gym. But I was really a pretty good student. I was on what they called the honor roll. The first 2 years in high school, I took the prep course for college, like Latin and algebra and all of the subjects to go on to, college. Well, sophomore year, I did the same and took geometry and sciences course and all of that. And then I got to thinking, I don't know whether I'll ever be able to afford to go to college. I don't know if I want to spend that much time in school. I think I will switch to a business course. Now, I'd been on the honor roll and made really good grades in the college prep. But I decided I'm going to go for stenographic work. So, I took typing, shorthand, bookkeeping, and all the things that would go along with that. The typing, and I wasn't as fast probably as I should have been. The shorthand was a little slow, but I didn't make as good a grades, really. I mean, I was still considered, I don't know, in the top grades, but I really made better grades in those things. But anyway, I continued in the stenographic course, or the college business course, and graduated in top percentage of the class. And while I was in high school, that's when I first really got acquainted with Jean. My junior year, we went to the prom. And I knew of the family because my aunt had gone with his brother. And he mentioned the word Jean, but me having a sister named Jean, I thought it was a girl. He didn't like when I said that years later. He said I soon found out different. But anyway, we went to the prom. We didn't actually what you call date, but mostly in group, school ball games and the swimming parties and ice skating.
Now, that guy you're referring to is Gene Mars.
That was Gene Mars.
Was he in school in Paris?
Yes, he was in my same class.
Okay.
We were both in the same class, 1947. But anyway, we dated then, and mostly like on Sundays, my sister and I would, on Sunday afternoon, after we got home from church and all, we always got the horses out, and we went horseback riding on Sunday afternoon. Well, her boyfriend and my boyfriend, Gene, would come, and here we weren't back from horseback riding yet, but anyway, when we got back, they were there, and we would get cleaned up, and we first went down to Belridge Church. I had all of this time had belonged at the First Christian Church in Paris, was baptized there. And then Jean belonged to the Belridge Christian Church. So they had what they called Christian Endeavor. We would call it youth group. We would go down there after we got cleaned up, and we would go down there, and then that didn't last too long, so a lot of times we'd go back to Paris and go to the movie afterward. And even after that, sometimes we'd stop at have a Coke or a ice cream or something before we'd go home. But that was actually main dating. It was usually with groups, but now when we went to the movie and all, that was just Jean and I usually. Once in a while, my sister and her boyfriend. But really, I think that was one reason I decided I wanted to do more stenographic work, because I didn't want to spend all that time in college. I wanted to get married someday. Seemed like a long ways off if you went to college. But anyway, got out of high school, and I thought, I had this little brother, a lot younger than me. He's still at home. And I continued to live at home.
So you graduated in 1947?
1947. And Gene did also. Of course, his folks lived on a farm south of us a ways. And he started working for, I'd call it Farm Bureau, but it was Farm Service Company, FS.
Yes.
He went to work there, farmed some at home too, but he went to work there. And I had gotten my degree to work in office, my course, and so I went to work at the highway office, district highway office in Paris.
Yeah.
That was a political job, actually. I mean, when the politics changed, you lost your job.
My aunt worked there for 30 years.
What was her name?
Mariana Madden.
Yeah, I remember Mariana.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked there
Yeah.
starting in the summer. I was only 17 years old when I graduated.
What
went to
age
work
she
there.
was, but she worked
Yeah,
there for
I
a number
remember
of years.
her.
Okay. That's ironic.
Huh, that is strange. Yeah. But anyway, I worked there for, I don't know how long it was, and politics changed, and I lost my job. So they'd started District 4 schools then, they'd consolidated. They had an office in Paris. They needed somebody while their girl was on having a baby, and so they needed somebody to fill in. So I filled in there, and then I got a chance to go to U.O. Colson Company,
Yes.
and I worked in the office there. And I worked in the sales office, and we had a lot of salesmen over the country, but I was in the office there in Colson Company. Well, I got my diamond ring then. After so long, I said I wanted to work several years, so I think it was we graduated in 47. This was 1950, 1950. I got a diamond ring for Christmas. Well, we were going to be married the next June. 51 it would be. But the Korean War was coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided if he ever got to where, I could go and be with him, we wanted to get married. Well, he had to either be drafted or enlist. And a fellow that he worked with at the Farm Bureau, the Farm Supply, encouraged him to go into the Air Force, because this fellow had been a pilot in World War II. And he said, go into traffic control. So that would be a great thing to get into. So anyway, discussing this over, we moved our wedding date up. He got a, what do they call it when you get time?
Furlough?
Well, no, not furlough.
Well, no, you wouldn't.
He got, anyway, they wouldn't draft him as long as he had plans to get into this. So anyway, he made his plans to go into the Air Force, and so we decided we would get married, and we got married January the 28th, coldest day in the year, in 1951. And Gene was still working for Farm Supply until he was enlisted, but he got a furlough, anyway, he didn't have to go right then. until he got enlisted, and he left in April. We were married in January, and he left in April. Yeah. We had lived in Paris those 2 or 3 months.
Were you married in Paris?
Yes. No, we were married at the Bell Ridge Christian Church.
Oh, okay.
Bell Ridge Christian Church. And so anyway, he's still working, and I'm still working at Colson's, and he's working for Farm Supply. Well, he got into the Air Force and finally left April the 3rd of 51. That's when he went. And he went to Lackland for basic training. He got through that, and he called. Of course, we wrote all the time, but anyway, he called when he was about through with basic, and he had applied for air traffic control. That's what he wanted to get into. And so they said, okay, we'll send you to Keesler Air Force Base, Biloxi, Mississippi. Okay. Now this is after basic. And he said when he got over there, that the commanding officer said, if you are married and you get your wife down here, you can live off base.
Wow. That doesn't usually
He
happen.
called me, and right away I made arrangements to quit my job with Colson Company, and his folks helped me drive. I drove his car, Gene's car I'd had all this time he was gone. And we drove down there, got an apartment in Biloxi, and he and I lived in Biloxi for a while, and he was in air traffic control school. Well, this was like a hotel type thing. Well, we got a chance to move over to Gulfport, which is only just down the road, right along the water. So we moved over to Gulfport, and I started working in a bank there. And he was going to school. And then it came Christmas time that year. He could get a furlough home, Christmas, you know.
Wow.
And here I am working. So I told them, and they said, well, if you go home, you lose your job. Gene said, we're going home. So anyway, I lost that job. But when we got back, right along Route 90, along the water, there was this convention hotel, and they had an office where they needed somebody to work there, you know. So I got on there. So that was my second job down there, was working in the office at the convention hotel right along the Gulf Coast. And while I was there, someone encouraged me. I took my civil service test.
Okay.
Passed that. And it wasn't long till they called me to work on the base, Keesler Field, in the radar school in the office. And so here I am in the hangar. The offices were in the hangars, up on the shelf, kind of. There's rooms. I worked in the office there. Gene had gone through his schooling, of course, before this, and they asked him to stay on permanent party and instruct air traffic control school.
Wow. Okay.
So he was an instructor in the tower with, you know, and I was working right there on the base too, which was wonderful. We'd moved back to Biloxi by then in an apartment on Back Bay. So anyway, he's doing really well with that and working in a tower over at Gulfport and some of the time, and
You didn't have any hurricanes in while you were there, apparently.
don't remember that. Don't remember that. We loved the Gulf Coast. And I often said we spent our honeymoon 3.5 years on the Gulf Coast.
That's good.
Which was about right. But then about, 4 months before he was to get out in 1955. Well, of course, they poured it on, you know, if you stay, we'll do this and we'll do that. But Yeah, he decided that 4 years was all he wanted. So, anyway, he was going to get out, and I had gotten pregnant with Greg, our first son. And of course, this was an experience. He was born in the Keesler Field Hospital, which was just a barracks propped up on stones, you know. And half of the women there were servicemen's wives, you know, and they had gobs of pregnant women. So that's where you went for your care. And they said, if you gain over 20 pounds, we'll put you in the hospital until you lose it. So that determined that I wasn't going to overweigh too much. So in all that time, I gained 11 pounds with Greg, and he weighed 8 of it. So I said I did pretty good on that. But anyway, it was a very inexpensive way. I think it cost me $7 and something. That was the food I ate when I was in the hospital when he was born.
Amazing.
But when I got ready to deliver, one of our friends, we always had other guys and their wives that are in the same boat, you know. And she said one Sunday night, I think she's ready to go to the hospital. And so Jean took me over there. And so they checked me. Yeah, you're about ready to deliver. But this certain doctor was going off of duty. So they gave me a spinal block, you know. You can go to sleep till in the morning. So I did. I went to sleep. Jean went back home. Here I am, you know. I wake up early the next morning, and oh boy. So
Well,
anyway,
what happened?
well, and Gene had come back. Here he is, sitting out in the waiting room, and I have the baby, and the nurse goes out and says, "Sergeant, you have a baby boy." Gene was asleep, sitting out in the waiting room. It's exciting. So this was in November before Gene was discharged the next April. So Greg was about 4 months old. So I said, well, we were wanting a child. That was surely an inexpensive way.
Gosh, yes.
But anyway, we came home and back to living around Paris. And Gene went back to, he had all kinds of offers to go into air traffic control and all of that. But he had already told them at the Farm Supply that he would come back. And when he worked at Farm Supply, he delivered gas. He had a gas truck, before we went. But when he came back, they had added feed and a lot of these different things that Farm Supply has. So he was sales manager over the field, the fertilizer, gas, and all of those things. So he was sales manager over Farm Supply in Edgar County. And so he continued with that, and we lived in Paris, and Jim was born. There's 2 years between the boys, and Jim was born then. And Jim was, I guess, about 2 years old then, and one summer, Gene had a cousin that lived in Marshall, Benton Mars, who was actually a cousin of Gene's dad, but he would have been Gene's second cousin. Benny came up and he said, "Gene, I need somebody awfully bad to manage my furniture store. If you would come down and manage it a while, and if you liked it, then I'll sell it to you." Well, no, he was up for promotion in Farm Supply. He didn't believe he would go. Well, we didn't hear any more of that, but the next summer, Benny come back. He said, "I've really got to get somebody." And so when he told him he would let him buy it, then we moved to Marshall, 1959.
Okay.
in 1959. We'd been out of the Air Force 4 years. So Greg was just ready to start to kindergarten. So both of our boys spent all of their school years here in Marshall. Greg started kindergarten just a few months after we moved down here in August. We moved in August of '59. And so Jean was managing the furniture store. And they had plenty of help there at that time, and I had the two boys to take care of, and I thought, well, I'll just stay at home. But yet I'd never been just a stay-at-home. So I started babysitting, and I babysat with actually teachers' children that would have, I forget what, a couple different ones that I babysat with. And so that got kind of tiring, and the boys were up to, I think, Greg was probably about ready for junior high. But anyway, I got a chance to go out and work in the cafeteria. I worked in the cafeteria out at high school. And I worked there for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years anyway. And enjoyed that. Greg had gotten into junior high, I think, then, because I remember him coming through the line. But anyway, then Gene decided that he could use me at the store. So I quit there and I went to the store. Yeah. I of course, lost my salary out there, and when I got to the store, I just went to the store to work.
He didn't pay as well.
He didn't pay, period. Until after a few years, actually, the accountant said, if you don't start paying her, she's not going to have anything for Social Security. So anyway, I did start getting a little pay then. But anyway, when we bought the store, we had such wonderful, wonderful people that we inherited that knew the store, knew the people, and was liked. And that was Bob Moorcraft. Mm-hmm. He did laid linoleum. He delivered gas tanks, 100-pound gas tanks. And he worked on, of course, we didn't have automatic machines, but we had Speed Queen Ringer-type machines. He did all that kind of work, all the mechanical work. Bob, everybody liked Bob. And John Gabe, that was Rita Tarbell's dad, isn't that right? John, John Gabe. And he was salesman. And most of all, there was Mary White. She was the bookkeeper, so I wasn't needed in the office because she stayed on. She still kept books for the funeral home, plus the store. And it was so amazing, even after we had the store, people would come in there and pay on their funeral bills. Maybe it was $10 a week, Benny carried them, and we continued to do the same thing at the store. We always carried our own customers. And Mary kept the books, and so I got into the cleaning, arranging, and then in the decorating department. Did the wallpaper. That was my first, and helped with the paint, picking out colors, draperies, carpet. But
did they have the wallpaper and the paint and all when you bought the store?
Yes.
There was already a department or there.
Yes.
Okay.
And the carpet, we had Mohawk carpets.
Oh, yeah.
Bob didn't lay carpet. We had to have somebody, that was in that trade. And we had several different ones over the years that laid carpet for us. But I tell you, Bob was the greatest. He could do about anything. And John was too, but John was getting older, you know.
Where did you live when you first moved to Marshall then?
Right where we live now. We moved there, 911 Archer, in 59.
Okay.
So we actually have lived there now, what do I call it, 58 years, I think. 40 and 17. Yeah, about 58 years.
Okay.
And we've done a lot of rearranging, remaking, and all of that, but it's still home, and I hope it will be as long as I need it.
I remember you used to have not only furniture, but you did have appliances also.
Oh, yes. Yes. We had Speed Queen starting with that, and as years went on, Jim came in and helped us some, and he was in refrigeration. Mm-hmm. He'd gone to Ivy Tech. We had refrigerators. We had about any kind of appliance that, you know, stoves. We always had stoves, yeah. Stoves and
I remember some washers and dryers.
Washers, well, and years to come, of course, Greg was in with Maytag. He was a salesman with Maytag. He'd gone through the University of Illinois, and he was with Maytag Company. So we changed to automatic washers and dryers, Maytag. And Jim was doing the refrigeration. Bob was doing everything, whatever was along. And then Greg being with Maytag, of course that's why we took on Maytag for one reason. And then after he had been with Maytag 28 years, they sold to Whirlpool. Yeah. And he lost his job. But he'd been with them 28 years, and the one he's with now come a-hunting him, and he's been with them ever since. So that's, I'm short on names. Anyway, he lives down in Florida.
With the furniture business, and I know that changes, I guess, in cycles like anything else. Were you the one that was kind of staying up with the trend of modern versus this style or that style? What should we buy and not buy?
Yeah. One year we did the show house. Remember when they had the show house at Terre Haute?
Terre Haute.
And we did the dining room. And anyway, yeah, we had, I think, first class furniture companies like Tell City,
beautiful things.
Kraler at one time, and then I forget the other company that's still in business. Anyway, we had good name furniture, Beauty Rest mattresses, and I don't know. Of course, we had kind of inherited those companies too. But you know, as time went along, they grew too, and they didn't want to sell just a half a dozen this or half a dozen that. They wanted you to buy 1,000, or they buy, you know, many dollars worth.
And that doesn't work in Marshall.
No, and that's actually when we finally did retire. That was one reason, because the companies that we mom and dad stores had made into companies, you know, were going on, got too big for us.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was one reason that we retired, because, you know, in Marshall you couldn't sell several $1,000s worth of one thing, you know, at a time.
Everyone didn't want what their neighbor had either,
Right.
did they?
We had people that one girl I know yet, she said, I still have that sofa that I just drove by and then called you and told you to put my name on it. She hadn't been in or anything, but she saw it in the store and she thought it was just what she wanted. So just driving by, she
Well, we still have a Maytag washer that's still plugging away. Yeah. The dryer gave up the ghost and they couldn't find repair parts to do
yeah. Well, those were the greatest, yeah. Well, when I first come down here, of course, I had a old agitator type, washing machine. I was still washing on the, with the 2 tubs to rinse them in and all that. But it was nice when
ringers.
Wringer machine. And of course, we had those at the store.
Sure.
Bob worked on those things. Gosh, he could put
Kept
those
them running.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Having lived in Paris, growing up there, having lived in Mississippi, what was your impression of Marshall? You probably weren't too familiar with Marshall.
No, I wasn't. Marshall, when I lived in Paris, went to high school in Paris. And Jean says, we're going to move to Marshall. I thought, oh, that little town. That little town, And really, when we come down, the first time I think we come down and looked at the store, that was when they were parking in the center of the street on Archer Avenue. And Jim was a baby, I think, anyway. We parked there and walked down, and I just didn't know. I just, I just thought, Marshall, that's too little a place. But I tell you, Marshall has been wonderful. Marshall was good to us. I've always said that Marshall was good to us. And I wouldn't trade Marshall for any place in the world.
Now, at that time, there were a lot of these businesses in operation around the square and all.
Yes.
Are there particular memories that you have of some of the businesses around town?
Oh, yeah. Grabenheimer's.
Yes.
The 2 drugstores, Blankenship's and Martin's drugstore. Kroger's, I think it was Kroger's. It was a grocery store along there. The farm machinery place. Flowers, farm machinery. The dime store.
Oh, yeah.
Couldn't leave that out at all. Tom's restaurant. Oh, my.
How about that place down the street from you called the Strand Theater?
Oh. I was trying to think I can't remember what year that burned, but it was, I think it was already gone, maybe, wasn't it?
About 57, I think.
I think it was gone shortly before we moved here,
Okay.
yes.
I always remember Rademacher's wonderful ice cream, though, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the restaurants were wonderful. The grocery store was wonderful. And there was a little restaurant, what was that called? It was actually across from Tom's, a little pointed
The Keystone.
Okay. Restaurant there. But yeah, you really had everything you needed.
And things have changed so much in those years, too.
And Hedges, who was that before Hedges?
Now, I remember it as Hedges.
Yeah, Hedges store. I used that store clear up until they weren't there anymore.
I remember when I went to grade school, we made a visit to Grabenheimer's. I got 2 new pair of blue jeans. Then we went to Hedges and I got a couple new shirts. That was just a routine every August.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you decided to pull the plug and retire, was that a big adjustment? Or were you ready and this is enjoyable?
Well, I think because neither of the boys were really wanting to take it over. And it was just getting to where, like I said, they wanted you to buy more than you could sell. And we had some very good salesmen from all these companies, and they were changing all the time too. the lazy boy salesman. We always carried lazy boy chairs clear to the end, I think we did. And that was one that we could order a few from without ordering a big truckload. But I think that and the fact that we were both 67, I think. And it was getting time for us to retire or get somebody else take it over. And the boys were both employed and didn't really. Well, Jim wasn't at that time, but Kirshner's came after him right away, and that worked great. And he's still there.
Yeah.
And
so 1996 was your.
1996 is when we actually retired. And let's see, what are some other things? Oh, our activities that we enjoyed. We loved traveling and camping. And that was one thing. Traveling, while we still had the store, we only took 1 week vacation a year. This was very difficult when you were wanting to go, and yet we didn't feel like we could fly around these different places. And the boys were up big enough, and we loved to camp. So we would take off, usually maybe on Friday night, Thursday night or Friday night, and we would drive. And we would camp. We went to Yellowstone Park.
Oh, beautiful.
With my mother and dad with us. We had 2 tents. We didn't pull a trailer. We had 2 tents. By the time we would find a campground, Gene and the boys and my dad would put up the tents. Mother and I'd have supper ready. My mother and dad were getting pretty good age at that time, but they loved going. They'd never been to places like that because they'd been tied down with farming. But anyway, they went there with us, and Mother said, best vacation I ever had. And yet she slept on the ground on air mattresses in a tent, and we slept in another tent, and it got so then we bought a bigger tent that would have room for all of us, so they just have to put up 1 tent. But anyway, this time we went to Yellowstone. We were back to work, I think, we had Friday and on through till Monday of the next. We had the weekends on, took those in too. Back to work on Monday. Gone a week. And your prices for camping and for gas were so small then. And with Dad with us, well, he was going to pay half of it, and all this. And goodness, the tent or the camping fees were less than $5, I think, then about $2 and something.
Wow.
So you could go on. I've still got a book of that listing, and that trip cost us very little.
As the old saying goes, you could go on a shoestring.
Yeah, really did. Yeah. So anyway, that we did that 1 year, and then 2 years later, we recuperated, and so Mother and Dad decided, they'd go with us to Grand Canyon.
Another beautiful spot.
So we did about the same, only we stopped in that first night. Anyway, it rained, and it rained, and it rained, and we had this new, bigger tent.
That's not an ideal condition for camping.
No, and the tent hadn't been pre-shrunk. So during the night, we didn't have it zipped down. It was so tight we couldn't zip it down. So there we all are in there just floating in water. And that wasn't very good, that first night out. That wasn't very good. And I think that was Tulsa, Oklahoma, maybe. Anyway, we found out it rained 3 inches that night.
Ooh.
everything was soaked. So that morning we didn't cook breakfast, but we put the tent on top. We had a station wagon then. We put it on top. We packed up our sleeping gear, stopped at the next where they had a laundromat with big dryers, and put our bedding and stuff in there.
I was wondering how you got dried.
Yeah, got that all dried. And then, of course, we did that and ate our breakfast and were on the road again. Went across, Texas, I think. And then we started North Flagstaff. We stayed that next night at Flagstaff. And lo and behold, it started sprinkling.
Here we go again.
But it didn't rain hard, thank goodness. So anyway, we were there and then got into Grand Canyon and just had a wonderful time camping there and everything. Came up through to the four states that come together, and then over south in Colorado there.
It's a beautiful state.
And stopped at the for the military college. Anyway, Greg thought he might want to go to school there.
Military, the Air Force Academy.
Air Force Academy.
Yeah.
Air Force Academy.
Colorado Springs.
Yeah, Colorado Springs. And so we kind of toured that. But anyway, and then stopped at Colorado Springs, toured that. I don't think we took time to see too much of Denver because we had to scoot on back home to get home in time. But,
What was your favorite spot that you visited?
favorite spot? I liked Colorado Springs. We'd go up the mountain to my Pikes Peak and
I was
all
wondering
that.
if you got up to Pikes Peak.
Yeah, we got up to Pikes Peak and I like Colorado. I love Colorado. And since then we've made many trips back to Colorado. We've got a granddaughter living out there now, Rachel, Jim's girl. And I love that. Let's see, what have I left out? Oh, the different, I don't know. Well, this goes way back, but when I was it was 7 years old. Actually, you remember when we hear the weather so much, they'll say, well, the hottest day that summer was 1936. I was 6 years old, 1936. We'd moved to this farm, had a well that we pumped dry.
Right.
But we kept drinking out of that well. Mother said I laid around the last part of the summer, just laid around on the floor and just didn't feel good. And about time for school to start, I would have been second grade. Took me to the doctor and I had typhoid fever.
Ooh.
And this was from, I think,
well.
drinking out of the well that had gone dry.
But just last week, I think it was one day in Phoenix, Arizona, it was 117.
Oh,
And I think in Death Valley it was up 120 something.
yeah.
So I mean, that's inconceivable. At least now we have air conditioning.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, in all of these houses, my folks didn't have indoor plumbing until we were in the Air Force and come home on leave. So that would have been in the 50s, early 1950s. Yeah. Actually, when they got, because they put in a bathroom, I know, when we came home, and had remodeled the kitchen. We at the time when I remembered, we had a little pump on the sink,
call them pitcher pumps.
Yeah, pitcher pump. That was what we had for water. But,
We've all, look around now, we've got so many modern conveniences.
oh, yeah.
What would be one thing you'd have to say, I just couldn't live without?
Well, I wrote down, I think, electricity and running water, but those weren't appliances. I would hate to do without my automatic washer and dryer, because I used the ringer type and all this. When we were in service, I washed, and sometimes Jean's uniform for a while. Got to taking those to the base. But I washed in the kitchen sink a lot of stuff and hung them out on. We had a line there at the problem.
Did you have to starch a lot of those things to get them crispy?
Well, that was one reason that his uniforms looked better if he took those to the laundry. So he got those done there, but as far as our just wearing apparel, I washed them in the sink. A lot of times hung them over the bathtub, but if it was pretty enough, I'd put them, there was a line outside at where we lived, so.
Let nature do its job.
Yeah. So I would say the washer and dryer probably.
If you were at one of these places where you were traveling or maybe overseas and you ran into someone, they say, where are you from? You say, I'm from Marshall, Illinois. And you say, where is that? What's that all about? What would you tell them about Marshall? What might be a nice place to visit?
Well, I usually tell them we're along east central Illinois. We're about, 400 miles south of Chicago? Is it that far?
About
200 miles south of Chicago. I said, we're just across the Indiana line, about 9 miles, and there's Terre Haute and there's Indianapolis. And I said, it's a wonderful place. We live on old Route 40 that came through town. It was Route 40, the first one. And I said, wonderful town. But as I said, we have two nice parks, camping parks, close. We have, we're close to, Terre Haute shopping if you don't find what you need in Marshall. And so other things, I've always loved fairs. And even the state fairs, Illinois and Indiana State Fair, we always went to those. Sometimes we took a covered truck and would pick up a whole bunch of people, and my uncle would drive us all to these Indianapolis State Fair, to the fair.
Well, this has been a delightful visit with you. And this is exactly what we're talking about, is just reminiscing and thinking about times. And it's not for today or tomorrow, but somewhere someone's going to listen to this and say, gee, I didn't know that about Patty Mars.
Well, I tell you, I think the things that I stress most is family. Family and church, to me, are the two things that we've always had. We were both from several in our families. We always had a lot of extended family get-togethers, always. My folks and all of the uncles, aunts, cousins, we've always had to get together. One time at Thanksgiving, I remember for supper that evening, I had 46 people. But that happened to be Greg's birthday and a cousin's birthday.
That'd be quite a crowd.
And we always had big get-togethers like that. And as far as church, church always come first. And Jean and I never missed church, hardly ever. There were some things that I had written down, organizations that I belonged to. I don't see my notes on that, but like I said, at the church, I was helping hands. I washed the communion ware. I taught Vacation Bible School down at our old church here. I directed Vacation Bible School one year. And we have a group out there now of the senior members. We call it GMCs, that's God's maturing children, not mature, we're still maturing. God's
I like
maturing
that.
children. There's just a number of things in the church for all ages that you can get into.
My wife wanted me to say, be sure to say hello to you and what wonderful work you had done for Burnside.
Yes, Burnside Guild, and also the museum, the Historical Society museum, belong to that. Gene, when we try to go someplace, Gene would say, "You belong to everything in town." We was trying to get time to get away, but I don't. Let's see, what else was it that I enjoy so much? Oh, Antique Study Club.
Oh, yes.
I enjoy that because it goes along with the furniture styles and,
Sure
and all of
does.
that. I've belonged to that quite a while. And one of the special things is what we call nowadays HCE, which is HCE, home and something education. HCE, home and community education. Now this used to be what we called home bureau
Yes.
and then home extension, but now they've cut it on back, and that was actually, we were getting information from the University of Illinois, which we get very little right now. But anyway, I belonged to that for 50 years. I belonged to that in Edgar County, moved it down here then, and belonged to that. And another thing I like about it, it stresses 4-H. And I think that's one of the
wonderful.
greatest organizations for young people.
It is.
And I was in 4-H for the full time I could be in there from 10 till I was 20, and took about every project, I think. But to me, that is a wonderful organization, and that's one reason I want to keep my membership with that church and home, basically.
Well, certainly over the years you've contributed a lot to Marshall and the community, and your business was certainly a mainstay here. Always had such beautiful displays in your window, and I miss that.
Yeah.
And I think everyone does too. But I want to say thank you for your time. It's been a delight visiting with you, and we'll certainly always remember Patty Mars.
Okay. Thank you.
You mentioned the